Hello and welcome to the Tangy Stitches Knitting Podcast. My name is Claire and this is episode number 5. In today's episode, I will be sharing about one finished object, which is what I'm wearing, and updates on a couple of whips, including my test knit for the pearl sweater, and I'll finally finish with a couple of acquisitions that I got on local yarn store day, which was yesterday, and that's everything in today's episode. So sit back, relax, grab your knitting needles, and let's get started. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is my one finished object, and it is what I'm wearing, which is the Monday sweater by Petite Knit. And mine is knit up in Knitting for Olive Merino in soft blue and Soft Silk Mohair in Dusty Aqua. So those were two kind of different colors, with the soft blue being this pale blue. I don't think I brought the leftover yarn here, but I have the merino in soft blue and then the Soft Silk Mohair in Dusty Aqua. And the result of the fabric is basically this heathered kind of soft aqua teal color. I think it turned out really nice, and I have basically been wearing it every single day since I finished it last week. I think I started knitting this actually on a plane ride for during Christmas break around that time. I forget exactly which flight it was, but I started it on a plane ride. And then I finished actually most of the last sleeve coming back from my Japan trip on the plane. This sweater is constructed top down and it's a raglan construction. So you start with the collar, it's folded over, and then you do the raglan increases and split for sleeves and the body. And the body and the sleeves are both finished with a 1x1 rib. This is a very simple construction and would be a great sweater for a beginner to knit, and I had a lot of fun knitting it. This is just plain stockinette in the round, so it was pretty comforting, I guess, to knit on this while I was working on my other knits, and especially my test knit, which is an all-over cable sweater. It was really nice to kind of have this one to go back and forth to. And now that it's over, I am thinking about starting another stockinette sweater, which I'll talk about when I get to acquisitions, because I already have a plan for a new stockinette in the round sweater, something simple to knit on. When I was knitting this, I used two different techniques to knit the sleeves. So the first sleeve that I knit, I actually tried out the magic loop technique, and I had knit the majority of that first sleeve using magic loop, which I discovered that it's an okay technique for me, but I didn't really like using that technique to figure out the tension as I'm going around. So with magic loop, what you do is you knit on one long pair of circular needles, and when you get to the point where you can't knit anymore because your stitches are being kind of stretched out, then you pull the needle through and then you can start knitting again. But when you pull the needle through, then your stitches are no longer on the needle, so you have to make sure when you start knitting again that you don't pull the working yarn too tight. Otherwise you're going to have tension issues, and there is going to be like a stitch or two that's too small, and then when you come back around you actually have a hard time getting it back on the needle. So I think that's just something that if you were to use that technique, you would just need to practice, and with practice I'm sure that it would be just fine. But for the second sleeve, then I switched back to using double pointed needles, which is the way that I always have knit my sleeves. And I have had laddering issues before on different sweaters. So this time around I was when I was learning about magic loop a little bit and trying it out and figuring out the tension, that's when I was kind of thinking about like the laddering issues. But when I started knitting with the double pointed needles, I actually went onto YouTube to look up kind of a tutorial about how to knit with double pointed needles, even though I've done it before and actually not have had problems. So I think in my Mia sweater, which is one of the first sweaters that I knit, that sweater I definitely used double pointed needles to do the sleeves, and I don't think I had any problems with laddering actually at all. And in the Lanark sweater by the Creabea, that is knit in half fisherman's rib, and I think that's why I was having laddering issues in that sweater, because of the stitch pattern. Whereas with just like a plain stockinette sleeve, I think I had figured out, or just my natural knitting with double pointed needles ended up looking pretty good. Whereas with the half fisherman's rib, I think maybe I needed to be more careful about my tension when I was changing needles going around the sleeve. But I did look up a video about laddering and how to prevent laddering when knitting with double pointed needles. And in that video, the person talks about how pulling the yarn tight as you're changing needles is actually the wrong way to adjust tension and prevent laddering, because when you pull the yarn tight, what happens is that the ladder is actually caused to the row below your knitting. So when you're pulling it tight, you're not actually reducing slack from the row below, which is where the slack is. So in that video, he actually recommends that you don't pull the yarn tight, you knit kind of as usual. And the thing to make sure of is that when you're changing needles, that the yarn between your last stitch and then your first stitch is not too far. So making sure that your needles are close together, all three of them, when you're kind of knitting, if that makes sense. Anyways, after I had watched that video, then when I was knitting up my last sleeve, I actually was taking a lot of care to like make sure my needles were all together. And that ended up being kind of problematic actually, because then what I was seeing was not the laddering that you normally see when you talk about laddering, which is kind of a gap in the stitches. But what happened to my sleeve is that you could actually see a column of really small stitches. And I think what was happening was that I was still having a little bit of that tightening of a stitch when you're going around changing needles, but I was also making it maybe worse because I was putting the needles so close together that maybe that changeover piece of yarn was actually shorter than if I were just knitting it straight on circular needles. So anyways, that was kind of a funny thing because I actually didn't have any problems with laddering on stockinette sleeves before. And then after kind of watching this tutorial and thinking about it more, I think it actually caused more issues. So that could be a lesson in if something is working, then you don't necessarily need to change it. But at the same time, it is good to kind of understand more what is happening when you're knitting. And I think that's something that I'm kind of interested in. It's kind of interesting to learn about knitting and I guess improve in it as a skill. In the end, I think it actually blocked out really well. I think it was this sleeve that I knit second. And I don't think you can really see it at all. So after I blocked it, you could still see those columns. And I did go in and try to adjust the tension a little bit. So I took like a knitting needle and was pulling on the stitches a little bit to try to put more slack into the column of stitches that looked a little bit too tight, just to try to even it out a bit. And I do think it worked. So I would go in and kind of do every stitch or every other stitch in a column, and I did it for like a couple of columns. And I also think now that I've just worn it for, I don't know, three or 4 days in a row, that everything has kind of evened out. The other thing about these sleeves was that I knit them and I did not do any kind of blocking on the sleeves, which now I've kind of learned that it is pretty nice to do mid-project blocks just to make sure everything is at the correct length. I think like with my Lanark sweater, that sweater turned out a little more cropped than I would like. And I am actually thinking about going back to add more length to it. But it is pretty difficult to want to go back to fix something, especially when you have so many other new projects that you're working on. So I don't know when I'll ever get to that. But for this Monday sweater, I did do a mid-project block for the body. And I'll stand up just to see if I can show you the length of it. But this is the length. This is what the sweater looks like. And I think I blocked it maybe when I had knit up to about here, just to check the length and make sure that it was growing in a way that I knew what length it was going to be. I do think my bottom ribbing is just a little bit short. I think it's like a little less than 2 inches maybe. And the only reason that I knit it that short was because I was finishing up my 3rd balls of yarn, and I didn't want to join in a new ball of yarn just to knit another inch of ribbing. But now that I think about it, maybe I should have, but also I think it looks fine, so I'm not too worried about it. But for the sleeves, I knit them to a length where I had kind of measured out. I did a little bit of math. I think I need to just be more careful when I'm doing my math so that I know kind of exactly what measurements I'm going for and the percentage that I think that my knitting will grow, and actually do the math and make sure those numbers are correct, because a lot of times I just estimate. So like this sweater, I think it grew maybe 10% or something like that. And so I'm thinking, okay, if I need 11 centimeters, then if I knit 10 centimeters, 10% of that is 1 centimeter. And actually that's kind of exact, but I don't think the growing percentage was actually 10%. Maybe it was like 12% or 14% or something like that. But that's something I think I should, especially with my test knit, be more careful about. Because for my test knit, I don't think I want to do a mid-project block, because it is an all-over cable, and I think it would be fun to do the blocking at the very end so that you can see like the whole transformation of this fully cabled sweater. So I think that's a kind of maybe a dangerous thing to do in terms of getting the lengths that you want perfectly for the body and for the sleeves. But now that I have this Monday sweater, I think I can at least know the measurements that I definitely want for the body and for the sleeves, and we'll hope for the best there. But I feel like I keep getting distracted from what I was talking about, but with these sleeves, I had knit them to a length where I calculated about 10% of growth would kind of get them to about where it was supposed to be. I think to the measurements in the pattern too. And then when I blocked it in the end and put it on for the first time, I actually thought the sleeves were too long, and I thought they were too long in a way that I would have to go back to reknit them. So then I was thinking about whether I wanted to graft them, because this is a really long sleeve ribbing. So I could maybe cut kind of here and then do the Kitchener stitch. So I was already thinking about that the second that it came off of the blocking mat. But actually now, after wearing it around for 3 days, I actually think the sleeves came out perfectly. And I think part of it is just that, well, I'm not sure, but it kind of feels like they're not as long as when I first blocked them, which I'm not sure if that's true or not because I didn't actually really measure it. It was just kind of a feeling of it being too long. When I stand up, the sleeve kind of covers almost up to my thumb, kind of like this part of my hand. But then if I'm sitting down and if I'm like on a keyboard or something, then, you know, it really kind of sits over like this and it is the perfect length. So I'm glad that I didn't immediately go in to try to fix the sleeve, because then I think they would have ended up maybe a little bit too short, and then that would have been really pretty frustrating to have to then think about whether I wanted to add length to it or not. So I think what the takeaway from that is once you finish something and you think something is not perfect, maybe wear it around for at least a few times before deciding whether or not to go in and fix it again, because maybe it was not really a problem at all anyways. So this is my Monday sweater and I have really enjoyed wearing it. So maybe I'll come back at a later time to talk about how it's been wearing, but I can definitely feel myself wearing this sweater a lot. Okay, moving on to some updates on my whips. This is a project that I started on the right before my last episode. This is the Sonya Shirt by Paula Strict, and it is a t-shirt, summer t-shirt that is knit from the top down. You start knitting the back panel, which is this trapezoid that is shaped by short rows. I'm already holding it up. And then you pick up stitches for the fronts. So this is the left front that I've started working on already. Then you would pick up stitches for the right front, and then join and knit around. The yarn that I'm using is Pasquale Pinta, which is a merino and silk and Rami blend. So this is the yarn that I'm using, and I think the fabric is turning out really nice. So it's really quite soft, and I think it'll be a very, very comfortable summer t-shirt. So right now I have a lot of stitches that are on hold, and the way that I put stitches on hold is that now that I have so many extra interchangeable needle cables, because I did buy some extra ones, what I like to do is just use those cables, and to prevent the stitches from falling off, I'll just add on some needles that are bigger than the needles that I'm using for the project. So I think this pattern is supposed to be knit in 3.5 millimeter needles, and I ended up sizing up to 3.75. And even at 3.75, I didn't really hit gauge, but like my gauge is still too tight, but I didn't want to size up any further because I already felt like the fabric was nice the way it was, and I didn't want it to be any more sheer or drapey. This is another case where I think I really should calculate out exactly what size I should then knit. I'm not actually sure even what size. I think I decided to knit the size 2, and figured that if the end measurements ended up between a size 1 and a size 2, then that would work out pretty well. So I think that is what I'm kind of going for here. One thing that I realized when I was working on this last was that the back panel is supposed to be knit to a certain length, where when you put them on hold, then you work the left front and the right front, and you join the fronts together first before joining everything in the round. And I think my back panel is a few rows too short, so I'm gonna have to go back to add some more rows onto the back panel before I can join everything in the round, which I think is pretty annoying that I did that, because I like to join in yarn as little as possible. Oh, that was another thing about this Monday sweater, was that, okay, so with the Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair and the merino, I think with one ball of the merino and one ball of the soft silk mohair, you use up the mohair before you use up the merino. So you always have a little bit left over of the merino. I had bought 5 balls of both the merino and the soft silk mohair. So when I had finished knitting the first 2 balls, I actually think I immediately got rid of that scrap yarn. And it was because I was traveling. So I guess I didn't just want to carry it around, and I wasn't at home, so I didn't just throw it into where the rest of my scrap yarn is. But then when I had finished the 4th balls, I still had leftover merino from my 3rd ball of merino that I finished knitting when I was at home. And I basically, okay, let me see if I don't even know if I'm not telling this very well, but I wanted to use that leftover merino with my 4th ball of, my 5th ball of the soft silk mohair, because I was definitely going to need to use the 5th ball of soft silk mohair because I just finished knitting the 4th. So maybe I only had the merino left over from the 4th ball. Anyways, so I only had how much of the sleeve left? I think it was around here. So I had finished knitting my 4th ball right here, and I still had some of that leftover merino from the 4th ball, and the 5th, I had the 5th ball of everything. But I thought that I could maybe stretch out that last piece of merino for like this length of sleeve. So I used that leftover merino, but it didn't end up being enough. So I think I got to somewhere very close to the end of the ribbing, but maybe there was still an inch of this ribbing left to do on the sleeves. And I did have to enter my 5th ball of merino. So I couldn't save that 5th ball. But I think this is something to keep in mind if you're using for Knitting for Olive, which is that the yardage for the soft silk mohair and the merino are different enough that that you should consider saving that merino, because if I had saved it from the first 2 or 3 balls, then I definitely would have had enough merino for this sweater, which used up maybe 4.5 balls of the soft silk mohair. So something to consider. So maybe I know for the future, if I'm knitting something in those yarns and I'm knitting about this much, I probably can get away with buying 4 balls of the merino and 5 balls of soft silk mohair. Anyways, so that was an aside. But all to say is that it was kind of annoying that I discovered my back panel is too short and I'm gonna have to go back in to add some rows, because I'll just have to add, I think I'll have to add those rows in and then break the yarn again, which I don't like to do. So anyways, this is the update on my Sonya shirt, which is coming along nicely. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is a new cast on. I did show swatches of this, I think, in my last episode, but this is the progress on my Fleur Tee by Woolfolk Knits. This is a summer t-shirt that is in this pointelle pattern, which I actually don't know what pointelle really means. I have an idea of like what the pattern looks like, but this is kind of a lace motif. I don't know if that's super visible on camera. I'm trying to hold it into the light and also see if it's showing up on viewfinder. Actually, maybe showing the swatches. The swatch would be better because my swatch is blocked already. Angle it to the light. So it has this kind of lace pattern, which I think this is the pointelle, but in the way that the holes are arranged. And it's separated by these columns of broken rib, and it's a very cute pattern. I'm knitting mine in a locally dyed yarn, which is so I don't have the hank anymore, but this is Peninsula Yarns cotton wool. This is like a 50% wool, 50% cotton yarn, which I think will be a really good summer t-shirt fabric. And this is how much I have so far. So the t-shirt is constructed from the bottom up, and I have the bottom ribbing done and, you know, maybe 3 inches so far. I actually well, I don't know if I like, but the bottom up construction is kind of nice because I've knit this a lot on my flights too. One thing that's nice about it is that when you're knitting bottom up is once you finish the cast on, then you're just in kind of the body of the work, like the body of the sweater or the body of the t-shirt, but it's kind of like the body of the work, where usually when you're knitting top down, then there's a lot of shaping that's happening very early on. So you need to kind of be looking at the pattern or understanding the pattern of the shaping that you're doing as you're knitting it. For like a raglan, for example, or for the Sonya shirt, you're knitting all the panels kind of separately at that point. But for something that's knit bottom up, then once you cast on, you're kind of already in the main part of the work. So I actually feel like that makes for a really good airplane knit, or maybe like if you take public transit and would knit on the train or on a bus, because then you're not really thinking about anything to do with the shaping quite yet, and your work is really small, so it's very portable and you're able to kind of just take it with you and start knitting on it. This pattern, lace pattern, is pretty easy to remember. It was kind of funny because when I knit the swatches, I knit 2 swatches because I was trying out 2 different needle sizes. So I think the pattern suggests that you use 2.5 millimeter needles, and I knit up the first swatch in 2.75 because I did not have any 2.5 millimeter needles, and it turned out that my gauge was too big, so I ended up ordering some needles that were 2.5 millimeter and knit up this second swatch. But then I actually decided that I liked the look of the 2.75 better. So this is the 2.75, and then this one is the 2.5. And I don't know if you can really tell the difference on camera, but with the one knitted up on the smaller needles, this is the correct gauge. So the suggested needle size does give me the correct gauge, but I just felt like the kind of holes were no longer as distinct. Like they weren't as shapely as in the original swatch that I knit, where I think everything looks a bit neater. And maybe that has to do with the thickness of the yarn. Maybe if this yarn were a lighter weight fingering weight, then this swatch would look closer to this one, just smaller scale. But I decided to just go with the 2.75 that I first started swatched with. And I am knitting the extra small. So I picked the extra small size because my gauge is big, and I'm, I guess, a little bit hoping for the best. No, I should calculate out again what I think the measurements are going to be, but just looking at the circumference of what I have so far, and I think my needles are a bit short, so I need to like knit a little bit more before it will kind of be able to lay really flat. But this looks about right in terms of how much circumference I think I need on a t-shirt. And it's a little bit stretchy, so I don't think it'll be too small. And I think if it is a little bit big, that'll be okay too. So I think this t-shirt is recommended to have negative ease and kind of fit onto your body that way. And I think it'll have negative ease still. So I'll just knit it up and see what happens, but I think it's gonna fit just fine. So this is my Fleur Tee, the start of my Fleur Tee, and I think it's looking really nice. I also picked the color that is in the sample because I just really like how the sample looks, so I'm excited to have one that is going to be similar to that. So this is my Fleur Tee. Okay, moving on to my last work in progress that I'm going to give an update on. I still have my Brady loop cardigan that I have not knit on at all, so I'm not going to share any updates for that. This is a test knit that I'm doing. This is the Pearl Sweater by Knitonomy, and it is an all-over cable sweater where the cable is 1/2 stockinette and 1/2 seed stitch. Yeah, when I saw this pattern, when it first showed up on the test call, I really felt like I was just drawn to it and wanted to knit this up. But as I'm knitting it, it is a beast to do an all over cable sweater. So I think in the future I probably need to think carefully about whether I want to do this kind of sweater on a test knit schedule, because it does mean that I have to work on this a lot over the course of the test knit. I think the test knit is running for maybe 6 weeks, so it is definitely doable to knit a sweater in that time, but it is a pretty compressed timeline compared to what I would normally knit at. Like this Monday sweater I started knitting on in December, and I just finished it in April. So, you know, it's taken me 3.5, 4 months to knit this, whereas this one I'm gonna be knitting in 6 weeks. But that is what I signed up for, I guess. So this sweater is knit, constructed from the top down, and you start with the back panel. So this is my back, and it is shaped with increases for the shoulder. So you end up with this trapezoid shape. And from there, you can either pick up stitches along the diagonal for the front pieces, or cast on for the front. And the reason, or if you cast on for the front, what you then have to do is basically seam up the front shoulder with the back shoulder. And then you'll basically have the same thing as if you picked up stitches on the shoulder. But when you seam it, then you end up with a stronger structure there. And I decided to do it that way because it was written into the pattern as an option, and because I had heard, or I've seen people talk about how sweaters can be more structurally sound when they do have more seams. So I just wanted to try out that kind of construction where I seam up the shoulders. But anyway, so you pick up or cast on for the fronts. Then you join the fronts first before you join everything in the round. And now I have joined everything in the round. This is the armhole, and I'm knitting the body. And I think the body has, for my size, maybe 5 cable repeats. Not the full repeat, but just like one kind of section of the cable. So I'm almost done with the length of the body before the ribbing. And after I finish the body, then I am going to seam up the shoulders. And I probably will do the collar first and then do the sleeves. But I still have a lot to do on this sweater. And I think the test knit is over in mid-May, so I think there's maybe 3 weeks left. So definitely a lot of work to do on this sweater. One thing that I wanted to kind of talk about on the podcast was my experience doing this test knit, and one specific situation that I ran into, which was I found an error in the chart of the pattern. So for the pattern, and I know that this designer has a bunch of different fully cabled sweaters and cardigans, pullovers, and pillow covers even. So I know she's done a lot of cable patterns basically, but in this sweater pattern that I'm testing, which is the first pattern that I've ever seen of this designer, she basically has one chart that just shows the cable repeat. So the full sweater is not charted with like the increases or anything like that. And then she has row by row instructions for the entire sweater. And what I found was that in the chart, the seed stitch was basically off by 1 row. And what happened is that this is a cable repeat that is every 16 rows. So every 16 rows you're doing the cable. And when you're knitting back and forth, then you're knitting both the wrong side and the right side. And you knit back and forth for the back panel and the fronts before everything is joined in the round. And because you're doing the cable every 16th row, that means that for the seed stitch pattern, you're always doing the cable with the same seed stitch pattern. And by pattern, I mean whether it's purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, or knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, if that makes sense. So there's kind of 2 ways to do the seed stitch from beginning to end. Anyways, when I joined everything in the round, that's when I had my first right side row where you knit with the opposite seed stitch pattern that you knit before. So after that happened, then I wanted to check the chart to see whether it was right or not, because it felt very odd when in the past on every right side row you would purl 1, knit 1 for the seed stitch, and on the wrong side you would knit 1, purl 1. So when I got to the round, knitting in the round, and I'm on the right side rows because now everything is on the right side, and I came to my first knit 1, purl 1 on the right side, I was thinking, wow, that feels weird. It feels wrong, because I had memorized this mnemonic of like, you're always doing purl 1, knit 1 on the right side and knit 1, purl 1 on the wrong side. So I went to check the chart, and in the chart, it basically said that on the row after the cable row, it should be purl 1, knit 1, which was not what I was doing, because I was doing knit 1, purl 1. So I was pretty confused by that at first, but it just turned out to be like an error in the chart. So I let her know, and in that discussion, I think it took me a while to figure out how to phrase it because it was complicated to talk about. Even in talking about it now, after the fact, it still is a little bit confusing, but there's a lot of knitting terminology, and when you're reading the chart, you have to know that when you're reading the chart, it's usually made so that you read from bottom to top, and then the right side is usually right to left, and the wrong side, if you're knitting the wrong side, would be right to left. Sorry, left to right. See, this is already very confusing. So I was trying to explain myself in this group chat with everybody what the mistake in the chart was, and I think it took a little bit longer to figure out how to explain that. And it was kind of a bad experience in some ways because I think the designer had used this chart before in many patterns, so she didn't think that there was anything wrong with it because it's gone through maybe like multiple rounds of testing for different patterns. So I think she didn't carefully read what I was saying, but also maybe I wasn't explaining it that well. But it did feel like as a test knitter that if a test knitter is trying to point out something that is wrong or even just confusing for them in the pattern, that then the designer should take that feedback as to change battery again. So tried to finish my thought. But I think I was saying that if a test knitter is giving feedback to a designer, that they should take it pretty seriously in terms of just making sure they understand what the issue is, or try to put themselves in like the position of the test knitter, where if something is confusing, maybe that's something that can be clarified more in the pattern. As a test knitter, I feel like we are doing a lot of work in some ways, like for the designer, and I know that we sign up to do the test knit and we know kind of what we're getting ourselves into, but if you're bringing up some issue that you found in the pattern to the designer and they kind of I guess say something or don't seem to take your feedback seriously, or like read what you wrote very carefully, or try to get to the bottom of the issue with you, then it kind of feels like, you know, not that good as a test knitter. Anyways, it really wasn't any kind of big issue, and in the end, I think she did finally understand what I was saying after I took the time to do some diagrams. It actually is very simple to explain, which is that like the seed stitch is either knit one, purl one, or purl one, knit one on the right side, and the cable always happens on the same pattern. So like, does the cable happen on the purl one, knit one, or does it happen on the knit one, purl one? And whichever one is true, then that should be reflected in the chart. So it's pretty easy to explain now after the fact because we kind of discussed it through. But at the time it was really confusing for a variety of reasons to figure out how to explain like what the mistake was. But no, the designer was like very nice. It wasn't that she was rude or anything like that. It was just that I felt that maybe she didn't think that her pattern could be wrong because it had already gone through multiple rounds of testing, not just for this sweater in particular. And for the chart to be wrong, I guess, for no one to have caught it in the past. And I don't know if it's wrong in any of the other patterns that she released with this pattern or not. But yeah, I actually think the reason that it was probably really hard to spot the error was because of how clear the row by row instructions are. So because the row by row instructions are so clear, I think it's very easy to just follow the row by row instructions And then by the time your seed stitch pattern is established, then for any intermediate knitter, which I think if you're knitting this sweater, you definitely want to be at least intermediate. I would definitely not recommend this sweater for a beginner knitter. But when you're reading your stitches, then it's really easy to continue the seed stitch pattern because you just knit the purls and purl the knits. So it's pretty simple not to have to refer to the chart at all. But in the end, I'm sure she wants her pattern to be as clear and accurate as possible. So she fixed the chart, and I think now everything is good. Anyways, this is the progress that I've made on my purl sweater, and I am maybe halfway done with it, so it is going to be done by the deadline. I am going to finish it by the deadline. So in the next episode, I will show the results of this purl sweater. Okay, so that's my last work in progress, and I have 2 acquisitions to share that I just picked up during local yarn store day, which was yesterday. So these are some new acquisitions that I got. Reaching behind the camera. So the first acquisition that I got was Woolfolk Far. And this is in this really beautiful forest green color. This is a 100% merino wool that has this chainette construction, or not construction, chainette spin, or I don't know, the word is not there for me right now. But this is actually yarn that my sister picked out because I'm going to be knitting my sister a sweater. We were in the yarn store together and she saw this sample of this very chunky weight, like a bulky weight, top-down sweater that's a little bit cropped with some 2x2 rib on the sleeve and the bottom hem. And she saw that sweater and loved it and wanted to get that, or wanted me to make that for her. And I have been meaning to make her something, so we decided to go with that. That sweater is called the Bayview sweater, and I'll put an image of it on the screen. But one issue with that, not really an issue, is that that sweater is knit from the bottom up, and I think given that she wants to have it at that crop length, I think it'll be way easier if we were to be able to find a top-down construction so that we would be able to do the mid-project block and see what length it would turn out to be. And make sure the sleeves are, actually I guess the sleeves in both like a bottom up and top down, for the sleeves you can figure out the length, but for the body you would have to know exactly where you want to split for the front and back. And I think she also wanted that drop shoulder look, and with that drop shoulder I think it would be a little bit hard to know exactly like where the underarm is gonna be. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna use that pattern exactly, but she wants a bulky weight, and actually this yarn is worsted weight, so we're kind of gonna just swatch it up and see what kind of gauge we can get with it. But yeah, I guess I'm looking for a top-down drop shoulder sweater that is a worsted, Aran, or bulky weight gauge. And I guess for the ribbing, it would be pretty easy to change from 1x1 rib or whatever the rib is in the pattern to the 2x2 that she likes. So if you know of any drop shoulder, worsted, Aran, or bulky weight, top down constructed sweaters, let me know because I am looking for one of those for my sister. So this is the first acquisition that I got, and I did get 6 of these. These are 50 grams, so it's actually very light. This hank is it's pretty big for 50 grams, but it is very lightweight yarn with this chainette. So this is Woolfolk Far. The second and last acquisition that I got is for another baby sweater that I'm gonna make, and it is, I think it's called the Caramel Sweater by NashKnits, and this is such a cute little sweater. I have never done color work before, so I think that it would be nice to maybe learn how to do color work on a smaller project like a baby sweater. And the yarn that I got for that is Rowan Softyak DK in this color. With, I think it's called Driftwood. And for the contrast color, I got Rowan hand knit cotton in this brown color. And the reason that I got these 2 different types of yarn was that I guess just because there wasn't a dark brown color in this Softyak, and this was kind of nearby. So the baby sweater that I knit, which was the Storm sweater, that one was knit in Rowan Summerlight DK, and these are 2 other DK yarns by Rowan that are primarily cotton. So this Softyak is actually 76% cotton, 15% yak, and 9% nylon, and it is machine washable, so I think that's something that is important to look for when you're knitting for babies, is that you probably, new parents probably don't want to be hand washing their baby's clothes, so I really wanted to find yarns that were machine washable, which all of those 3 that I talked about are. So this is the Softyak DK and hand knit cotton, and I will be using these yarns to make the, oh, I think it's called Salted Caramel, maybe? Salted Caramel sweater. So that is everything that I have for this episode. Thanks so much for listening and sitting here with me. I hope you enjoyed your time here, and I will see you guys next time.